The music. Oh, sorry. Let's turn the music off. Yeah, I just turned it off. Gotcha. All right, good evening, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started here. Ding, yeah, ding, ding, ding. Welcome, everyone, to our Red Barn event tonight. It's a special one, working with Native Plant Society, and we've had a lot of good presentations working with them, so I'm really pleased and happy about this one. My name is Joshua. My pronouns are he, him. And I am the Community Programs Manager here at Wenatchee River Institute. And our mission is to connect communities, people, communities, and the natural world. And so we do that in all sorts of different ways. I'll get into that to this just a moment, but first I wanted to make sure we acknowledge Ollie, yep, with beverages over there. So if you bought a beverage or if you want to still buy a beverage, she's over there to ring you up. And then we have Jeremy there in the back helping out with the tech. So we're very thankful for our volunteers. WRI, we have lots of different programs that we run. We kind of have it split into youth programs where we bring programming to the schools, or we'll bring kids up here to our campus here. We also have after-school programs that we're working with kids. And then we also have our community programs that are presentations like this in the Red Barn, different workshops we have, different big events that we like to be a part of or put on. And so we're always trying to think of how are we connecting to this place and bringing some of that education. One part of doing that that we've committed to is sharing a land acknowledgement before all of our programming. And so I'm going to share that here with you all. This land acknowledgement was created alongside the Shimpersquatchie people, and we're spreading the message they wish to spread to the public. The land Wenatchee River Institute sits on is the ancestral homelands of the Shimpersquatchie, Piscosa, or Wenatchee people. The Shimpersquatchie, meaning people in between, had villages positioned along the Wenatchee along the Wenatchee River and surrounding areas. Their ancestral homeland extends from the Cascade Ridge throughout what is now known as the Wenatchee and Okanagan Valleys. The culture and economy of the Shimpersquatchie people centers on taking care of the land. They fish, hunt, gather roots and berries, basket-making materials, and medicines. The Shimpersquatchie are named within the Yakima Treaty of 1855, and language to establish the Wenatchee Reservation was never followed through, even with the needed surveying completed. Many Shimpersquatchie now live on the Colville Reservation, 150 miles northeast of Leavenworth. They were forced off their land here, and the U.S. government moved them to this reservation. The Shimpersquatchie people are still alive today. They continue to practice their culture, harvest their traditional foods and medicines, and hold their ceremonies passed down from their ancestors. Most people won't see or notice them, but they continue to be on the land they are connected to. Their traditional language is Inhamchin, an interior Salish dialect, and I'd like to welcome you all by saying hello in their language, Tilhusht. We offer this land acknowledgement as the first step to amplifying Indigenous voices and recognizing the harm done to them as a people. We stand as an ally to recognize their connection to the land and their rights to practice their culture on these sacred lands. We encourage all to learn about the Indigenous peoples of the place you call home. The Wenatchee River Institute is committed to sharing this land acknowledgement and following up with other actions to educate and be respectful. Thank you. I'd also like to make sure that we thank our sponsors. I'm going to flip through the slides here just a moment. I don't remember which direction it is. There we go. Sponsors help to put these on, along with everyone who donates and is a member with us. So we want to thank everybody who contributes to this. And I'm just going to name off some of these. It's a little bit of a list, as you can see. City of Leavenworth, North Central Washington Audubon Society, Sleeping Lady Mountain Resort, Ludwig's German Restaurant, Leavenworth KOA, Icicle Brewing Company, Obertal Inn, South Restaurants, München House, Gustav's, Hotel Pinch and Anna, Leavenworth Chamber of Commerce, Syndicate Smith, Rhine House, Blue Elk Inn, the Nature Conservancy, Wild Birds Unlimited, Leavenworth Coffee Roasters, Leavenworth Village Inn, Sage Mountain Natural Foods, Chocolat, Barron House, Cove Resorts, Tierra Learning Center, Riverfront Rock Gym, and Rimmer-Reuter Construction. So we want to thank our sponsors for helping support this and all of our other programs. All right, one last piece here. So we started what's the word I'm looking for? I'm losing words up here. Strategic plan a year ago. And part of that was making sure that we have ways for the community and for people to give us feedback. So we're always looking for feedback, what we're doing well, what we need to improve on, ideas. We just want to make sure that we're being very open with that communication. So this is one way to do that, is this QR code. So if you have ideas or thoughts or comments, please scan this. It'll just take you to a Google form where you can fill that in. And I'll bring this up at the end if you have any thoughts after the presentation. So that's it for me now. I'm going to welcome Ted Allway up to talk about Native Plant Society.
Thank you, Joshua. So I'm Ted Allway. I'm the chair of our local Wenatchee Valley chapter of the Native Plant Society. And this is a great collaboration with WRI that we can do this year with wonderful facilities. These are not only Zoomed, but also recorded for viewing later. We have another program coming up here the last Thursday in February, excuse me, where Nate Hosni, a Leavenworth resident, a wetlands ecologist, will be speaking about cottonwoods and the critical role they play in our riparian ecosystems here in north central Washington. Promises to be a really interesting and relevant talk for many of us. We also have other programs coming up in March and April. And starting in the spring, we have a series of activities, including many flower walks that extend into the summer. If you are not on our mailing list and would like to know more about those, and if you're present here right now, which you are, you can sign up on that yellow legal sheet. And those of you who are viewing this over Zoom, if you go to WNPS, Washington Native Plant Society, WNPS.org, you can contact our chapters through that. We can get this information to you. So we're happy to have you here. Well, I'm excited about tonight's speaker. I won't introduce her, but I have a background in entomology and horticulture, and so this talk combines my interests, and so I'm very happy to have this happen here. So to introduce our speaker, we have our program manager, Molly Jennings.
All right, thank you all for being here. Yeah, I'm also very excited about this presentation. I think it kind of brings together a larger picture than sometimes us native plant people. Oh, and hello, Angie. Angie Orpet strives to bring the joy of invertebrates to all people through conservation and habitat creation. Angie has been collaborating with farmers since 2016 to help with resource needs in perennial and annual crops. She has worked at the Washington State University and Tree Fruit Research Station, as well as Foster Creek Conservation District prior to her job at Xerces Society. She is very excited about native plants and credits much of her learning about Washington's flora to her involvement with the Washington Native Plant Society. Thanks for joining us, Angie.
Hello, Angie. Can you hear us?
Mostly.
Oh, yes. We hear you.
Here and there. I apologize if I'm slow on the uptake. We're in Portland, so I'm in a hotel lobby. So the music is overpowering. Just repeat if you can't hear me. So thank you for the introduction, Molly, and nice to see everyone, even though you're like little cute pixely blobs. Like, it's good to see faces. So anyway, I'll stop rambling. So tonight I'm presenting about some habitat work we've been doing in Washington. So I work for the Xerces Society, which is an international conservation organization that helps invertebrates through protection of habitat and species. It's named for the Xerces blue butterfly, which was last seen flying in 1943 in the sand dunes in San Francisco, and they vowed never to let a beautiful thing slip out of existence again. So major programs are habitat creation and preservation, pesticide reduction, endangered species studies, and then community science and outreach. And it also includes things that you might not think of, like freshwater mussels. So where are we going tonight in our presentation? The importance of pollinators, their decline, habitat, why put agricultural habitat in agriculture, the how-tos of that type of habitat, and then the results of that habitat work. So here's a beautiful graphic to help you feel the beating heart of the importance of invertebrates. So first off, they're food for wildlife. You know, they feed bears, they feed birds. Baby birds have to eat worms. They're great for pest control, spiders, lady beetles, you name it. They're eating those aphids. Pollination of flowering crops, bumblebees, native bees. You need bees if you want fruit and vegetables. And also just normal native plants need bees for pollination. Seed dispersal, ants burying seeds underground, then get forgotten and sprout. Water filtration, very important. Who doesn't love clean drinking water, or even their bioindicators for water health? And then soil health. Insects break down nutrients and put them back into the system. Their popular costume at Xerces at Halloween is to be a dung beetle. So, you know, just putting that on your Halloween bucket list. Especially important for my work is pollinators and human nutrition go hand in hand. So a few years back, Whole Foods removed 53% of their produce to give an idea of how important pollinators are to what they are selling. And here's what it looks like without the food that is pollinated by invertebrates. So 85% of plants are pollinated by invertebrates. So I think it'd be important for us to make sure that they're continuing to do that very important job. So unfortunately, invertebrates and insects are in decline. Studies have shown there's about an annual decline of 1 to 2% a year. And over the last 20 years, one study found a 30% decline. So really unfortunate to focus in on just two of them for pollinators. In particular, the monarch butterfly has declined 70% since the 80s. And then another really charismatic insect, bumblebees, 1 in 4 are facing the risk of extinction. So not great. And then we have, you know, fireflies are blinking out, dragonflies, stoneflies, things that are important for eating mosquitoes. Thinking of human health in that way as well. Food for salmon. So part of that decline is linked to, no surprise, pesticides, things that are supposed to kill insects, right? So this is a map about neonicotinoid use. So neonicotinoids are a artificial pesticide that imitates what's it called? Nicotine, there we go. Nicotine is a very potent pesticide on its own, so neonicotinoids are a synthetic nicotine, there we go. So neonics were created in the 90s, and they were actually viewed as a much safer alternative to things like DDT, which are now banned. So that helps put it in perspective for you. So this was 1994. So now 20 years later, 2014, this is a map of how widespread neonics, especially this consideration of imidacloprid, a neonicotinoid, pretty well extensive use, especially in the Midwest. And we also see there's a brown patch in the eastern part of Washington where we're growing fruit, wheat. So pesticides are really taking a bite out of pollinators like bees. So it's good that maybe we should make some changes there so that they're not so harmful. Maybe use different maybe biocontrols, And then another step to help our pollinators are create some on-farm habitat, things that are blooming when the crops stop blooming, because the crops only bloom a certain small period of time over that whole year. Create space for pollinators to live again. But who's going to pay for that habitat, those pesticide reductions? Well, it could be the farmer themselves, whose margins are pretty tight, the food company that's selling the food that the farmer sells, the consumer paying for organic food is a way to think of that, or the government who's regulating all this work. So Xerces Society has a partnership with General Mills, and that's basically a grant where General Mills wanted to see the farmers in their supply network put more habitat on their farms. So General Mills pays for seeds, plant materials, ground cover irrigation, and then Xerces technical support on helping the producer figure out what they want to plant and making that successful. And then the farms themselves supply labor, like planting the plants, weeding. So let's see if we can make some change, right? And then Xerces also has another prong to this. We have Be Better certification. It's a certification that's third-party verified to show that farms are doing the great work to protect pollinators, such as providing that habitat. 5% of their certified acreage has to be flowering, so it has to be either temporary cover crops or permanent habitat areas. And they also have to not use neonicotinoids, and there's other list of prohibited pesticides, and there has to be a buffer space. So we're trying to get at both of those problems, pesticides and habitat. And then also retailers are jumping on board here, and they're recommending to their farms that, like Walmart, Kroger, that they want to see this type of certification. So it's coming from the farm all the way to the food company. So what exactly are farmers then doing to help the pollinators and the beneficial insects through this grant? What we're helping them install? Well, basically food, shelter, and then protection from toxic pesticides. So here's an example of food, right? The lawn on the left, I'm not really seeing any flowers. It does look like it's ready for a great game of croquet, but that's not really helping pollinators. On the right, we have some blooming meadow foam next to an orchard. It's got some floral nectar resources. It's pretty dense. That looks great. Shelter, about these insects need places to live that are outside of the orchard that are protected. So on the upper right here, we have like a stream between two sets of almond orchards that has pollinator habitat in it. There's hedgerows, somewhere to come home and lay your head on your pillow if you're a bee. 70% of native bees are ground nesters, so they need open space. They need tufts of grass. They need bare ground. Here's a leaf cutter bee bringing in a leaf into their home. She's making a nest. And most native pollinators, native bees are solitary. So they just have one hole. They have a tube. There's no big hive like we think of honeybees. So got to make space for that shelter. And then the other 30% of native bees use hollow stems or like piles of rock or brush like bumblebees. And like osmia, if we think of blue orchard bees, they nest in a hollow tube. And same concept in a hardworking single mom, putting a ball of pollen in the tube, putting one egg in it, building a wall out of mud or leaves, petals, whatever it may be. So we got to make space for that on the farm. So these are some examples of how to create food and shelter at our orchard. So we have a field border next to the crop. You could do a cover crop that's a mass blooming like clover. And then if the farm wants to spray it, they have to mow the blooms so that the bees aren't in the crop while they're spraying. Permanent hedgerow. Have it next, wherever it fits. We put species of plants that will persist 20 years, as long as we want. And then also important preserving natural areas that already exist, like sagebrush. Some farms are like, oh, we can just bulldoze that if you want to seed it. And you're like, no, just leave what's there. That's doing a great job. You don't even have to do anything. It just does it on its own. Most importantly, what should we plant, right? Native plants. We definitely want to see native plants. We plant native plants with farmers. Native plants are better adapted. I mean, I don't have to tell it to you guys. It's preaching to the choir. Native plants are what the native pollinators are already adapted to. It's what the butterflies are looking for to lay their eggs. So let's put something down that they want. We want at least three species blooming from spring to fall, 3 species each season. Usually we try to plant at least 5 because not all plants survive at the sites that we plant. Someone's always unhappy, so we have some redundancy built in there. Nesting plants have flowers that those leafcutter bees are going to want to put in lining their nests. Leaves that they're looking for, and then also pithy stemmed plants like elderberry, goldenrod, things that bees are going to want to nest in. And then for each site that we go to, climate and soil appropriate. And then we try to get plants and have grow contracts so the plants are pesticide free or the seeds are pesticide free. And if you guys are interested in figuring out what you want to plant, we also, we have Xerces has materials, planting lists for the inland Northwest. And then there's a Heritage Gardens booklet out of Columbia River Basin that has wonderful pictures. So plenty of resources for what to plant. So these are things that I have found survive well in ag settings. So when we plant with an orchard, we it's funny because you think, oh, Columbia Basin planting is going to be pretty dry. However, when you work with a farmer, they're used to watering the tree day in and day out. The habitat tends to also get watered day in and day out. So we tend to plant kind of like semi-riparian. We don't want anything that loves it dry, because it's just going to be swamped. You just have to, the farmer wants the plant to survive, and to them that means watering it. So it's kind of funny. So things like serviceberry, strawberry cinquefoil, red osier dogwood, snowberry does great. And then if they have cherries or blueberries, things that have soft fruits that are susceptible to spotted wing Drosophila, we don't plant things that have a nice fleshy fruit because we don't want this habitat to contribute to their pest pressure, because then they have to spray, and we're trying to avoid that. So things to consider. We always send the plant list to the farmer before we plant so they can nix things they're not comfortable with, and make sure we get our at least 3 to 5 bloomers each season. So there's some plants if you're looking for what to plant. These are things that do really well all over. And then we also do meadow seeding. So these are seeds that seem to come up well in like the drier areas. We lay down drip strips, but still the soils here are kind of sandy and dry. These are things that I have seen consistently come up no matter the conditions. So if you're looking for some ready to go plants, now I can't vouch for them to sticking around, but they definitely at least come up. Something that has a tendency to take over is yarrow, so I caution you for planting too much yarrow. Just give it a little, put its foot in the water and don't let it, don't give it the whole planting because it will definitely make itself known. Um, so step one, here's how we go through the planting with the farmer. We do planning, go out and scope the site, make sure that it's going to work. They're not going to be shoveling snow onto it, so it's going to be crushed, or it's actually sharing a bank with the irrigation canal and it's going to be sprayed. So thinking ahead of where the habitat is, we want it to be permanent. Another thing is figuring out how close is it to the crop? We need to have an appropriate buffer for those pesticide sprays. Is the farm organic? Do they have soft fruit? All those things go into planning. And even, if you're planting your own home or garden, thinking about like aspect, is it really sunny? Is it shady? Little things like that. Site preparation, making sure it's good to go. Let's see. Oh, so for part of planning is part of pesticides. So I'm gonna do a little brief review of pesticides and beneficial insects. So when pesticides are sprayed, even if it's not the bees are around directly, exposure can still happen. So say you spray the plant and it's blooming a beautiful summer day, and you spray the bee, and the plant is on it, or the bee is collecting items for her nest and she collects contaminated materials. The pesticide that was used had a long period where it was stayed on the flower, so the bees picking up the pesticide even though it was sprayed like 3 days ago, or the bees nesting in the ground where it's been sprayed, so its nesting site has been contaminated. The plant that's sprayed has a systemic pesticide, which means it goes through the nectar, the leaves, the roots, which is what farmers want because it's repelling the insect at all parts of the plant, but it's bad news for that pollinator. So we just recommend the farmer uses something that's safe for pollinators. Oh, sorry. They're starting to vacuum the floor I'm on, so if you hear a vacuum, I'm sorry. Emphasis that systemic pesticides aren't safe, like neonics. Just a reminder when we talk to our orchard partners that the regulatory body that works on pesticides only tests pesticides on honeybees, and there are 600 plus species of native bees for which we don't test pesticides on at all. We don't know the effects. We don't know the effects on their life stages. So like a teeny tiny bee is going to have probably be way more affected by a pesticide than a honeybee. So just something to think about, like really no pesticide is safe. But we emphasize, put in buffers. If you're using air blast in an orchard, it's 60 feet. If it's ground spray, like on a crop like wheat, 40 feet. And you can try and block drift with tall plants like arborvitae, etc. Okay, so then here's site preparation. So these are some examples at large scales. So we have solarization. This is at a farm in California. You lay down a big sheet of plastic and you leave it on the ground from spring to summer, fall, so that the seed bank in there is getting baked. It's hopefully killing those seeds. And then you plant after you remove it in the fall. So usually this is like for seeding. Next is like an organic soil prep where you're tilling the soil to kill the plants. If the weeds are really bad, you probably have to do this like a couple of years, depends on how it is. And then conventional spraying, herbicide. This one usually goes a lot faster. You have to spray it from spring to fall. Spray it before the weeds go to seed. You probably have to spray 3 or 4 times. This is usually what people elect to go for unless they're organic. So, but yeah, and then next step is installation. We bring the plants to the farm. It could be anywhere from like 50 to some of the sites in California get like 2,000 plants at a go. It can be an extensive planting. depending on the season, we want to see irrigation out first, so we reduce shock. And then it's usually planted by hand. Orchards have a lot of labor. As you know, fruit management is labor intensive, everywhere from pruning to picking the fruit. So on the days where the workers aren't doing full-time orchard work, there's a lot of hands ready to plant plants. On the smaller farms that are owned by families, it's more of like a group effort, and we plant all day for many days versus like I've planted at a farm where I had 700 plants and 40 workers came out of a bus, and we got that done in like 3 hours. And then laying out the irrigation, we recommend drip irrigation. The more water you put out in a wide area, the more weeds you're going to have. Drip irrigation can be fickle. It just takes more time, and you could have a line that gets clogged. But in terms of weed control, you can't beat it. So, and then mulch helps as well to keep those weeds down. Next, monitoring and maintenance are important. You can't just plant it and forget it. You got to come back, weed it a few times. Mulch can help with that, or ground fabric. If it's really bad, like thistle, spot spraying, but usually we try not to spray the habitat once it's in. And then make sure the irrigation's still working. We say to irrigate it for 2 years, and then you can turn it off because the native plants are supposed to be deep rooted up and adapted. And there's a bit of like letting them know that it's not going to be an English garden. So, and then we have the results here. So here's our plantings in Washington from 2018 to 2024. The little green dots are where we've done habitat, and the blue dots as well. A lot of stuff in the central area. So remember, this is feeding the grant supplying this is coming from General Mills, and they're using apples and pears and blueberries in their products. So that's why it's mostly on the eastern side of the state. So here is like an evaluation of how our planting has done. So this was a pond that was planted in 2018. And then we came out and we evaluated it the year after it was planted, and then a few years later in 2021. So we did a rating of 0, not present, to 3. This is kind of arbitrary. And then there were 8 ponds that we looked at. So there was showy penstemon, lupin, biscuit root, flax, blanket flower, Oregon sunshine, blanking on the common name for that, aragonum, 2 types of that, barrel to spring, balsam root, sagebrush, milkweed, and of course, yarrow, our favorite. So most of it came up except for Oregon sunshine and oh my gosh, biscuit root. I'm blanking. I can't know why I'm blanking on this. Across most of the ponds. But then when we came back in 2021, there were just a few surviving out of that. So penstemon, blanket flower, snowy buckwheat. Oh, buckwheat. That's the one I'm thinking of. Some sagebrush, milkweed, and then yarrow. So a lot of it had dropped out over those years. It could have been from the watering regime. It could have been, I don't know, a lot of things. But there were a lot of volunteers that popped up, probably that floated in on the irrigation water. So like San Juan, evening primrose, goldenrod, cottonwood. Some of these pond sites had like 15-foot cottonwoods growing in them, fireweed. So a mix of like invasive, naturalized, and native plants had seeded themselves in those gaps. So you just never know how it's going to turn out when you do a planting. And then also, did these have the effect we wanted on our pollinators? So Xerces does monitoring with morpho groups. So normally, when you think of entomology, you think of going out there with your net and collecting the bugs, putting them in alcohol, using a scope, identifying what they were. But we try not to kill the things that we're trying to attract and increase. So a way we get around that is morpho groups. So we kind of categorize the bees by where they store pollen, what their hair structure is like, body shape. So we have bumblebees, chapped leg bees, medium dark bees, green sweat bees, striped sweat bees, teeny dark bees, striped hairy belly bees, metallic hairy belly bee, and cuckoo bees. And then we also look for things that farmers want to see, like syrphid flies, parasitic wasps, ladybugs, and lacewings. So here's a little, in the summer we monitor, here's an example of one of the sites that I visited. This pond was seeded in 2018, and this is a monitoring I did in 2024. So on the left upper is the control. This is a site that I do that's at least 200 feet away from the planting. I lay out a transect 200 feet, try to make it a little bit scientific here, trying to see if the differences that we're observing are, have a comparison, right? So the control on my graph is dark blue. So there's not too many dark blue lines here, right? So on one of my monitoring days in May, I only had one striped hairy belly bee in the control versus the habitat is the picture on the bottom. I have my transect through that. Lots of flowers blooming. I have multiple types of native bees and honeybees in numbers greater than one. Syrphid flies, tiny dark bees, striped hairy belly bee. And then I monitor the site again 3 weeks later. Huge spike in bumblebees. So just to visualize, and then here's another way to visualize it. So on the left, I have my control. I saw a honeybee and a syrphid fly in kind of that dry, non-blooming area. Maybe they were lost, trying to find their way to the habitat. And then on the right here, we had wasps, striped hairy belly bees, teeny dark bees, medium dark bees, bumblebees, syrphid flies, and honeybees, and in multiple numbers. I think there was like 10 bumblebees I saw over 15 minutes. So the habitat seems to be doing what we intended it to do, which is great. And then also the producers themselves are happy with it. They're usually looking for pest control. So we had a producer 4 years on. So this is when it first started, it was pretty sparse. 4 years on, the habitat fills in, especially when it's a seeding. It doesn't just bloom beautifully overnight. It takes time. But in the spring, they saw a cloud of lady beetles come out of their habitats and rescue them from the aphids that were in their apple block, and to the tune of 90 acres of apple had lady beetle control, which is money in the bank because they don't have to spray, and the habitat's helping them, which is what we want to see, because then they want more and they'll make space for those habitats to happen. So that's great. That's what we want. So overall, the results, so from 2018 to current, we have 53.8 acres of perennial flowering habitat planted in Washington. Interest from growers continues to grow every year. I will say beneficial insects are usually the main attractor, maybe not so much pollinators, unless they're really into helping our pollinators, because most farms already buy honeybees for their pollinating purposes. So beneficial insects is where it's at. And then Bee Better certification is also growing steadily. Now there's 8 farms in Washington. Yeah, so that's great news. So we're achieving our goals here. And then if you wanted to, this is about farms, this presentation, but I know a lot of you have gardens yourself, or if people online are looking for ways to increase their pollinator habitat. Xerces has so many PDFs available to download, or if you know farmers, send them to the website. recommendations on how, what, where, how to do these types of habitats. So then, got to thank all the supporters for Xerces Society. Many, many people help our work go forward. If you love invertebrates, feel free to donate to Xerces Society. We are a nonprofit. And then take-home messages. We really want to put habitat back into our agricultural systems. There's great opportunity to do it. Farms are interested. There's incentives from food companies. There's grants from food companies, certifications, and it's beneficial for our farms to do so and our pollinators. And then again, everyone can follow these steps. You provide food, you provide shelter, and then protection from toxic pesticides. So I'm currently in Medford, Oregon, but my new Washington person for Xerces Society is Michael. So I have his information here. If you want help with farms in Washington or questions, please reach out to Michael. He has more specific local knowledge now than I do. But yeah, that's all. Hope I didn't talk too long. All right.
Thank you, Angie.
Yeah.
Can you see the audience here?
Yeah, I hope was the vacuum cleaner really loud? Like the guy was like vacuuming right next to my table. I was like, do I run?
We couldn't hear it at all. No.
Oh, thank God. He was like.
So for questions, if you all have questions, I'll probably just repeat those so Angie can hear and so everyone online can hear. And then I also have a few questions from folks online. So yes, Ted.
I'll start one. Hi, Angie. This is Ted Alway. I really appreciate all the more you coming to us from a hotel room in Portland and making this happen. This is great.
Yeah,
I'm curious. Are you able to continue your work with Xerces down in Southern Oregon?
No, our program is not really down there, so alas, I'll be with Xerces until like April, but until then, still I'm helping train Michael, and Michael's getting going, and so yeah.
And when you were working here, Angie, it looks like, particularly with the funds from, what was it, General Mills, was a lot of emphasis on tree fruits and berries. Did you work with other crops outside of fruit crops?
Not so much, because it was limited by the grants, so like it had to be either organic or feeding to the General Mills supply chain, because they were the funders. But I was able, we had our first inaugural year of Washington Habitat Kits, which is a different grant funded by Fish and Wildlife. And those were able to go out to homeowners and any other farms that wanted habitat. So we had some like vegetable farms. So in a sense, I kind of worked with, but I wasn't like one-on-one consulting like what I did for the orchardists.
Ted, you helped plant the habitat kits here at WRI.
That's right,
Yeah.
Xerces,
Yeah, I don't know if you heard that, Angie, but we got some of those habitat kits here.
Yeah. Well, it's going to happen again this coming fall, so apply again. And then we got funding for an additional 2 years, so it will keep going. Our goal is to keep it going because there's a need, right? And it's nice. People love to plant native plants if you don't have to pay for them, right? You just get the kit, you just put them in the ground, good to go.
I have a couple questions here online. I'll ask one here. Could the grant money provide native seeds to people who want to revitalize their land?
Yeah, if it would have to be, if it was an orchard, or if it was like a food land, but it was organic, they expanded their definition that it wouldn't have to necessarily be to General Mills, but it would have to be at least organic. So that is a unfortunate thing there, but it's not to say in the future Xerces might not get another grant where it could be not to just orchards.
One more question here, and then we'll get some audience questions. How much mulch is too much for weed control when it comes to blocking bees being able to access ground nests?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, mulch is, so if you, it's like a fine line, right? Because you want to block the weeds enough that your plants get established. So I'd say like, so we usually try to do like 3 inches around where the plant is so that the plant isn't competing. But I'd say maybe don't replenish the mulch after it degrades, and then leave bare spaces other places that aren't the hedgerow, or usually there's like a weedy bank or like there's other spots in the orchard that don't have mulch, and it's that's where the nesting happens more. Or if you're planning on putting in a hedgerow and there's an area where there's bee homes, like holes in the ground, just don't plant there. Like find another spot. That's part of actually the Bee Better certification, is identifying where bees are already nesting and not disturbing the ground. So.
All right. Questions? Yes.
Angie, congratulations on getting 50 plus acres of habitat in Washington so far. And I'm curious how the conversation goes with farmers in particular, and what kind of switches their mind, or how do you win them over, I guess is my question.
Did you hear that, Angie?
I guess some of it.
Yeah. So yeah, asking how that conversation with farmers goes, and kind of what is that switch for them in that.
Yeah. So first, usually it's they want to know what it's going to cost them, and I say, well, it's free, except for labor, and they're like, oh yeah, whatever. And then they want to know. Usually they'll be really excited and then show me a bunch of sites that are like 1 foot from the orchard, and you're like, oh, that's not gonna work. So usually we do a drive around because they may think of habitat in a certain way and it has to be in a certain place. But then I'll be like, oh, well, next to your worker housing, you've got acres and acres of weeds that aren't doing anything for you. Like, why don't we just put it there? And they're like, oh yeah, we could put it there. It's more like letting them know that if we're trying to help the beneficials and the pollinators, you don't want to spray them, and if there's a certain range where there's going to be drift, so we want to, we're bringing them in, we want to take care of them. This is what it's going to take care of them. And they're like, okay, if that's what it takes for me to get these free plants, great. It's just transparency. Rarely we want to work with the farmer. Like, we're going to help them get habitat. It's not about us hammering rules on them. It's like, let's see what you have and let's make it work. It's more of a meet you where you're at. And rarely, I think maybe once there was like a site where I just couldn't find a spot for it, or they were spraying too intensively and I just didn't have a good feeling about what was happening there. So did I answer the question?
Thank you.
Any other questions for Andy? Yeah.
So Angie,
It should be over there, but
you have the microphone on your body.
yeah, this isn't.
Okay, Angie,
I'll repeat it.
if there is a tall plant that bees are stem nesting in, and you wait until just before snowfall to cut it, and it stays on the ground uncut, will they live in that, or does that kill them?
All right, can you repeat it? I couldn't hear it.
Do you want me to go over there?
Just to repeat it. What was the first part?
So if there's a tall plant and bees are stem nesting in it, and then it's cut just before snowfall, and it falls over, will the bees that are in that stem survive the winter?
So if bees are stem nesting and that's cut down, will the bees survive in that through the winter?
I mean, I think they do. They probably would be happier not being cut down. Like I know, like that sometimes you'll see stem nesters in sunflower, and so if you just like stake the sunflower back in the ground, like upright, I think it's more a case of like moisture getting to the stem and maybe making the pupae wet, or like being exposed to rot. I think it would be okay if it was dry.
Crushed by snow and they're like laying over anyway, so I'm like, does it matter if they're cut?
Oh, I see. Yeah, if they're already.
I think it would. I don't think. I think the stem's like integral enough. If you like broke up the stem or like if it was getting stepped on, I think it would be bad. But I don't think so. I guess I don't know much about it. It's more the case of if you cut down the stem, like you had a pithy stem plant and then you cut it down in the winter, but there wasn't anything in it yet, but like the bee would come and lay in it in the spring. I don't think the bee would use it because it's not a certain height from the ground anymore. Like it's not attractive anymore. But if it was already in the stem and you were just waiting for it to emerge and it's not getting trampled, I think it would be okay.
Mark, do you have a question?
Exactly the same thing.
You answered that one.
I leave as much leaf litter as I can, except in the yard, but everywhere I can leave, and I leave things as natural as possible. But when you get to some erigerons or blanket flower, they just get messy, and I know they die right down to the ground. So I typically kind of cut them, and then I leave that stuff. But again, I feel like I might be, that there might be a negative, impact from doing that, and it sounds like there kind of would be, but maybe some won't make it from basically what we heard.
Yeah. Similar question, but just is there a big impact for cutting and having that on the ground? Yeah. Is there anything? Yeah, it sounded like.
Same question.
Was there one back here? Another one back here? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Ted.
Angie, there's been more information recently and encouragement of people to leave the leaves, which also is related to this. Is Xerces involved in that? I've just listened to a podcast recently that was very intriguing about that. Can you clue us in about the value of leaving organic material on the ground over winter and into the spring, and if so, how long into the spring?
So leaving the leaves on the ground is great because it's like insulation. I don't know, you harken back to childhood where you'd make a big leaf pile and jump in it and then sit in the leaf pile, or waiting to scare someone out of a leaf pile and it's like kind of warm in there. It's the same thing for insects on the ground. It's like a layer of insulation. So in the fall when things are bedding down, like bumblebee queens or cocoons, pupae, they're counting on that layer of insulation. So if you come and you rake it up, then they're more exposed to the elements and freezing. And they even say like some people like to chop up the leaves with their lawnmower and then leave that mulch there, but it's still not the same level of insulation. So you really have to leave the leaves as they are, as they lie. And so if you're in a neighborhood that's really picky or you don't like how it looks, you can pile them up like around under your plants or, where the soil was bare, where things are nesting. And if you're like, well, I like a clean lawn, like, okay, you can sweep up your lawn, but if you can leave some of your leaves, that would be great. And then in the spring, you're supposed to leave them until, pretty well into spring, like May. because not everything emerges immediately when the sun comes out and the snow melts. Like everything has its own life cycle, and bees come out, and different types of bees come out in different types of in the spring. So you really want to leave them till it's pretty warm and you think everything has emerged that could have emerged. So like May, May, June, or I'm sure some of you have experienced in the past where you've been gardening and you get stung by a hornet that's been hanging out under the leaves. That's who's in there. I mean, why not just not risk that sting? Just let it lie there. And then eventually, like leaves break down and it's good for your soil too. So if you can tolerate a certain level of leafy messiness in your underbrush, it's good. It's good for the plants, it's good for the insects. Pick and choose your battles. If you want a clean lawn, sweep your lawn up, but stick those leaves under your bushes.
I have one more question. Do the stem nesters mostly nest in dicots, or do they also nest in grasses? And if so, invasive grasses?
What kind of insect are you talking about?
Like bees or whoever lays eggs inside of stems.
Like the mason bees or the native bees?
Sure.
So do stem nesters nest in dicots or also grasses, invasive grasses?
Yeah, I mean, anything that's hollow, hollow in the right size, they are not discriminatory. Yeah, I mean, since, their habitat is limited, like, they just use what is available. If you think about how much bees love Canada thistle, it's like, that's what's there and they're going to use it. So same for stem nesters. If it's available and it's the right size for their body, they're going to go for it.
Are hornets pollinators? So I should love them.
You should.
Pollinators.
Yeah, to an extent, they're not. So like a true pollinator has specific body modifications to collect pollen. They specifically seek out certain species of flowers. They feed their young pollen. So that's like a dyed-in-the-wool pollinator. Whereas like a yellow jacket, the adults do feed on nectar. So they're kind of like, they do collect and move pollen because when you land on a flower, pollen's going to get on you and you're like moving around. So they're like less important pollinators. But I think whenever I try to talk to a farmer about like yellow jackets or wasps, their main function for the farmer is eating pests. And then secondary is pollination. But in the fall especially, I see many, many, many wasps on the habitat. But they don't sting. I like walk right through them. They don't sting me. They don't even look at me because they're there for the nectar.
Yellow jackets this summer.
Any last questions?
We miss you, Angie.
I just had a comment.
Yeah.
That, Angie, when you talked about the yarrow, don't let it get crazy. I solved that problem on the south side of my house, downtown Wenatchee, by putting it with showy milkweed. So they're like in competition. It works beautifully. It's terrific insect habitat as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've had some farms forbid me from ever planting yarrow again. They're like, we hate this plant and we can't kill it. And like inside, I'm rejoicing because they'll never not have a blooming flower. But I understand that can be frustrating. But that's good. That's good. And I appreciate that you're planting another species and it's also blooming. So that's good. I just have to battle perception from the farms that milkweed is a weed and it's not native. That's a challenge as well. So the more people you talk about milkweed being native, the better. I don't know why. Maybe like 30 years ago, I don't know if there was a government agency saying like you should kill this, or it might be from like livestock grazing because it's, you know, slightly toxic. But yeah, that milkweed perception is, we've got to bat that down.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Angie, so much for your presentation. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. I hope I didn't babble too much.
No, not at all.
Very good. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for
All right.
being a great audience. I'm sorry I couldn't hear you over the vacuum cleaner and the music. Oh my gosh. I think he finally gave it a rest. He went away. He probably is eyeing my area. All right. Well, have a great night.